UX maturity, the reality of performance. I think today in 2015, the web is still broken. It's, you know, the way that people make websites is still, you know, they still suck quite a lot. And I mean that in terms of responsive sites as well. I still think that there are a lot of sites that are quite poor, even though the visual process, the way that we design things, the capability of code and the interactions that we can provide, websites still suck from a kind of humanistic perspective. And this is something that is not down to, say, people having larger digital teams or people even having, say, in-house expertise in terms of UX. The problem that we suffer from today is not so much UX competency, which is now, I'd say, established and a given for most large organizations. It's more to do with the choreography of that UX capability. And that is strategic. And this is what I think now is the thing that needs to actually happen to be able to make businesses deliver a better user experience. Having a bunch of UXers isn't necessarily going to make you deliver better UX. It's like turning up to the golf club with all the kit isn't going to necessarily make you a better player, if only. And I think one of the problems that we suffer from is that people don't think about experience from a holistic perspective. So here you have this kind of beautiful Starling murmuration. Who's seen one of these? Show of hands. They're amazing, aren't they? You know, the way that they morph. Here's a classic example where you've got a bunch of scientists from all fields that are trying to study this phenomenon that they call criticality. You have a situation where you've got a scale-free correlation that's happening. The birds at the back can follow the birds at the front. How do they do that? How's that done? And I think human behavior is a bit like this as well. You know, we have to understand things not just in a micro perspective, but in a macro perspective. We need to think about it in terms of trend, in terms of the whole. We call this concept emergence. And emergence is, I think, a science and a study of endeavor that all designers need to familiarize themselves with deeply. Because really what we're trying to understand is the movement from lower level rules to higher level sophistications. What are the building blocks that allow us to understand the macro experiences that we're trying to design? And there's a bit of a kind of paradox here because you can't really understand the kind of high level sophistication, the gestalt, by looking at the bits. It's impossible. This is a beautiful museum, no doubt. If I take all of the materials, I put them flat on the ground, and I tell you to look from above, what do you see? You see a bunch of stuff, a bunch of materials. However, when you bring those materials together, something happens. Something significant happens. And I think this is how we need to think about designing experience. So this presentation is going to be broken into 3 acts. And the first act is going to talk about the importance of UX that I consider, given my 21 years of experience. And they're going to talk about how we kind of measure some of those factors. And then I'm going to kind of walk you through a case study for a company that we've done UX strategy for. For me, this quote by Sir Henry Royce really defines, I think, what we are trying to do as designers. Strive for perfection in everything that we do. Take the best that exists and make it better. When it doesn't exist, design it. This is what we are trying to do. UX is a design activity. I often ask people, my question is, you know, so in UXD, what's the most important letter? You know, less experienced people will say, user. I'm like, okay. Then they say, experience. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good one as well. Design. I'm like, yeah, this is design. This is a designerly activity. We have to understand it and think about it from a design perspective. And for me, user experience means digital, completely. I don't mean it as in terms of customer experience. I'm going to come on and I'll define later how I see those things being different. But I think you need to be able to understand, for example, what user experience is to know what it isn't. This is fundamental to being able to design and shape better experience. Let's ask a question. 2015, digital is everywhere, in everything. If I ask, where is the store today? Is it on our phones? Is it out there on the street? Is it on my watch? Is it in my head? It's all of those places and more. This is the point. Digital blends into everything that we can imagine. It will blend into things that we consider unfathomable. It's uber pervasive. And we need to think about where it can go, what it can do. We don't know yet where it can go, what it can do. So we should have no limits on where it can go, what it can do. One of the ways that I help my clients to understand this, because this is quite, this is quite lofty, quite considered way of thinking, is that if you think about it in terms of ecology, what you then get is this understanding, this relationship between the micro, the device, and the macro, the system in which that device and therefore the person that is using that device operate. Ecosystem thinking is a way to contextualize and understand how to better appreciate user experience. This is what I try to encourage people to think like. Not user interface, not component, not widget, but something broader, something that has a cadence of interaction. This is what we're trying to understand. And I think something interesting is happening with the kind of emergence of user experience strategy. I think that what essentially will happen to user experience, and I think that this will happen within this decade, is that we will see it change again. We will see it change from people talking about it in terms of, say, research or design, but talking about it in terms of smart process, smart thinking, smart design. We can already see today that we have smart homes, technologies in smart homes. We're seeing the embedding of smart process and smart thinking within the office. Soon, those processes will be in our cities, and eventually they will completely encompass our lives. And I expect this will happen within the next decade. It's happening right now. There are some cities in the world that are significantly more digital than others. There are some countries in the world that have significantly more ambition to be more digital than others. By understanding user experience, we can understand and help them to become more effective at digital. But to become more effective at digital, we need to be able to measure it. And how do you measure this thing, this user experience thing? Because it's complicated. Anything that involves people and people's brains is complicated. Arguably, our brains are the most complicated thing we currently know of in the universe, outside of black holes. So, it's pretty complicated stuff. And one of the ways that I kind of encourage my clients to think about it is in terms of digital first. I'm going to read it out. So digital first is a guiding philosophy that places digital at the heart of the organization because it is working towards becoming totally digitally integrated. Now, people do this in different ways. I said about Amanda, Macmillan Cancer Support, they've embedded to a very high level supporting people through social. This is what digital first is. They are digital first, in my opinion, socially. Of course, they can get better at it. And there's an aspect when I spoke about it that, how have they really done it? They have done it. And I believe that they have done it because their fundamental business model is designed around supporting people. So that makes it easier for them than, say, other organizations to do it. That does not mean that they've done it in other ways. But socially, for me, the way that she spoke about social, I thought, here's a really good example of digital first. Really good example. And digital first means this. In the beginning, when I got into the web, which was about 1994, you literally were the kind of person that no one wanted to talk about. It was like weird witchcraft stuff that you did. The web stuff, what's that? Websites, irrelevant. I mean, in this country, we still call it the information superhighway. That's what we called it. Everyone's going to get on the information superhighway. And in time, through the 90s, then what happened was that kind of more web people emerged. Web designers, webmasters. Remember that phrase? Webmasters. My use of the word Uber, my love of the word Uber, is because I read an article by Mark Andreessen who referred to himself as an Uber webmaster back in 1997. It stuck. And then by about the 2000s, what I started to see was digital departments. It no longer was a bunch of web designers. It was a digital department. That digital department may be sat under marketing or it may be sat under IT, but it was a digital department. Today, in 2015, what we see is large digital departments. Now, I work with organizations that have 50, 60, 70, 100 plus people within a digital team. We've already heard from Andy at TDA that has clients where there are 200. I know of firms in America that have hundreds. Todd, that would have spoken today from his IBM days, said that they had 3,000 plus people. People are looking for designers. But because you have a digital department doesn't mean that you're digital first. That's different. Digital first means that it literally runs through the whole organization, i.e., the marketing department doesn't expect a 25-word proposition which works in an offline way to basically be manifested in a responsive way. They know that that is not the way to think. They think in the same way. They think digitally across the business. That's what digital first means. And that is a very clear sign of an organization's maturity to actually respond digitally and therefore deliver better user experience. The companies that are digital first, and they are rare, lead the field. They're the ones that have the greatest market capitalization, the ones that we all covet to be the best at what they are. And there are issues with how you become digital first. There are issues with how we design experience. We spoke about unicorns, okay? I have a particular dislike for this idea because it seems, a master of many things is typically skilled at none. This is an idea popularized by Plato, not my own. So I agree with that way of thinking. One needs specialization. One of the worst ideas that I think that exists at the moment is this idea of delight. I call it the fallacy of the immediate. People are designing these micro moments, these moments that are meant to make us go, wow. That's the experience. That's the thing I'm trying to design. Really? Well, to me, when you get to the top of the mountain and you see this amazing vista, this perspective, well, you need to get up the mountain, yeah? The mountain's a bit of a journey. You're not teleported there. You have to get there, which means that you have to get down. And quite often, that journey does not even start at the mountain. It may start way back. In fact, that journey could start when you're thinking about going up the mountain in the bath 5 years previous after having a nice glass of beer with someone. The journey is much bigger, often, than the thing that we're designing for. Yet the way that we talk about it, the way that we research it and often think about it, is very micro. That's a problem, because it's not making us think in this more macro way about experience. And I think of journeys as kind of moments of motivation. Journeys aren't flat, they're not the same for everybody, even though we're trying to design something that everyone can do. Our motivations are different, our contexts are different. We will be different depending on how we feel. And I think of it in terms of a choreography of motivations. And those motivations show overlaps. So, for example, let's say take buying an airplane ticket. Before I go to the website, I do the digital thing, I'm actually thinking about stuff. I may be having conversations with people about what I want to do. Digital is one bit of the journey, never the whole journey. Yet we talk about it as though it is the thing. Oh yeah, if we get this right, the business will be successful. When if you step back and you look at their business model, what you realize is their business model is broader than digital, much broader. So I'm looking for what I call the overlaps between these moments of interaction, these key moments of interaction that allow us to understand this choreography between off and online behavior. Because if I understand that, then I get a sense of what the true journey is, how people are going to feel about it, whether they're using a website or not, whether they're thinking about it in the bath, then they use a website. This is the way that I kind of try to get my clients to think about it. And this is a technique that I'm using because it's really difficult to explain how to think ecologically if you cannot even think in the way of a journey. You cannot run before you can walk. And essentially in ecology, what you have is many journeys together. And the thing about ecologies is they're kind of dynamic. They kind of change. This idea that we can design one and then be in perfect control of it is utter nonsense. It's like a pond. You couldn't be, if you put a pond in your garden, you can't really be in control of that pond. I mean, people that say they might as well say, well, they're in control of the sun. And then when you put it in that perspective, it sounds ridiculous. Once you put an ecosystem into operation, there are many factors that are kind of happening at the same time. We can't control all of them. Change one, it cascades to all others. This is the point of it. We have to think about experience in a much more Gestalt-type way. We have to be, as I say to my clients, you have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, with not knowing. Because you can't know all these things. You cannot. So you have to work out what you can know and build that up. And the thing about it is that even within an ecosystem, there are going to be key moments of interaction. Take the buying an airline ticket example that I mentioned. I buy the ticket. Let's say I'm in the country and I get an email, as you do, 36 hours before, 24 hours before, which allows me then to go to a website to update and manage my booking. You know, here you have a number of activities that are happening together. You've got the website, you've got the email, how they work together. This is what I mean by these key moments of interaction. This is what I mean about choreography. How do we choreograph them so they are meaningful rather than treat them in this discrete, micro-orientated ways? Another thing about ecosystems is they're not linear. They're the antithesis of linear. Journeys overlap. You could stop and start. You can pick things up. It may move you to do something completely different. And I think that that kind of reflects, to a certain extent, human nature, our behavior, especially cognitively. You know, I don't know if our consciousness is like that. Well, I can speak about my own. I can speak about my attention, and it kind of goes up and down. I don't know about you guys. You may all have superior attention that never kind of turns off, but mine wanes, unfortunately. I wish it didn't, but this is the reality of it. And I think within these, within ecosystems, when we understand them, is the ability for us to join, to see how these journeys join together. That allows us to see how we can start to design experience in a much more macro way, a much more non-linear way, a way that I think is more meaningful for how we actually operate as social animals. And the way I think about this is in a Gestalt way. The kind of total interaction is greater than the sum of all interactions. It's like I said about this building. I deconstruct it into its material components and there's a bunch of stuff. When it comes together, that bunch of stuff becomes something more than a bunch of stuff. It becomes a place. That place has meaning for us. This is how I think about experience, designing experience. I call it the micro-macro. And Lego is a really good example of this. Lego is the rules, the components, the atomic bits. Yet, we can make pretty much whatever we want to make with it, which is amazing. But we have to understand the rules, the relationship between the micro and the macro, to be able to do that, well. I showed you the murmuration. And what we see, because we're looking at it in real time, is it morphs. It flows. There's this sense that it moves together in this beautiful way. You slow it down to 200 frames a second, you don't see that morphing. What you see is this scale-free correlation phenomena that I was talking about. You see birds following lines perfectly, one behind the other. Perfectly. And if you look at it slowed down, you see them doing these arcs, and they all arc together in the same way. It's amazing. So by looking at something in slow motion, we get to see it from a different perspective. This is what I mean about being able to understand the micro and the macro. You have to see it differently. One of the other problems that we have, and it still happens today, is that people say, hey, Simon, I've been to this conference where people talked about this thing called UX. I'm like, okay. And we need some of that. We've heard that's the stuff, yeah? Like you can get it in one of these. So I'm like, okay, you know, can you imagine it? UX is actually, this is the nonsense of the craft in which we operate. It's commoditized because everyone can do it. And we kind of continue this silly idea that it's something that you can just apply like a magic wand or a can of, you know, a spray can. If only I wish you could do that. I would go into the manufacturing of spray cans quite quickly. And it kind of gets worse because people will say to me, you know, Simon, I've heard about this UX strategy as well. And they talk about that as though they could buy it in a spray can. Like, these things are really complex that we're dealing with. You know, digital disrupts businesses fundamentally. Look at Uber, what Uber is doing to the world, let alone what it's doing in one territory or one country. Now, how's it done that? People will go, oh, it's because it's an amazing UX, it's an amazing system, la, 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 la. No, that's just a modern way of presenting information. They get ecology, but behind that ecology is the way that they have completely changed the business model. And at the heart of amazing UX and amazing UX strategy is a very powerful business model. That's to me, what differentiates a UX strategist from a non-UX strategist. One talks about business models, or they talk about modeling. They're not so interested in the details, or they don't say things like, well, we are trying to design for the user here. It's like, of course we are. That's why it's called user experience. But we're interested in the choreography of activities. If I got two cars and I said to you, which is the fastest car, and they're both the same, you'd laugh at me. Go, well, but this is what people ask when they say, I want some UX, I want to do it better, we need to get some user experience. They're thinking that by bringing in this user experience, that they can improve performance. I know examples where completely rebranding, refactoring a whole site, a whole experience has made it worse. And then people say, Simon, what do we do? And I look at it and it's like, yeah, one site looks really modern, contemporary, and brilliant, and the other site makes my eyes bleed, but the site that makes my eyes bleed significantly outperforms the new one that they've made. And I'm like, Simon, we don't understand why. And I'm like, okay, what analysis did you do in terms of who's going to use this? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, your key customer segments. Oh, because what we've done, now I've analysed it, is you've alienated the people that you generate the most money from. And they go, oh dear, what do we do? But we thought that if we did this UX thing, it would just make it all better. No, it's more complicated than that. Much more complicated than that. So UX is pretty important, and we need to be able to measure it. And that means that we need to be able to measure it in a way that the organization or the business needs to actually apply it. And that will be different, because we're different. So I want to talk about a company that I've done UX strategy for. This is the world's largest cable company. Some stats about them. Big Corp. Okay? I seem to do a lot of work for Big Corp. I quite like it because it allows me to tackle lots of people. I like change on scale. I like big problems. They've got a whole bunch of brands that they work for across Europe. And this is an aspect from their brief. And I've kind of kept this bit in because this is what I hear from a lot of companies today. This is what they want. And this is really important what is being said here, because to me, this tells me that they are ambitious about user experience. They do not want to spray it on. They know that that will not work. They know. They've already done the research because they know. Provide a world-class digital user experience, which also differentiates us from competition and which supports our commercial objectives. See, this tells me something, that they really take it seriously, because this tells me they're interested in embedding something, which means that they are thinking in terms of business models. It's a given that they want to provide their customers a greater, more meaningful experience. But you don't tell them that, because they would think you were an idiot. It's implied that that is going to happen. The thing that is more important is how can they embed this thing? How can they truly get better at it? And I see a lot of organizations that are trying to do this today. One of the things that I helped them to understand was the difference between customer experience and user experience. Let me put it to you like this. Chemistry and physics are both branches of science that study matter. Chemistry is not subservient to physics. If it is subservient to anything, it's subservient to science. Science is the major branch that we are trying to understand, because science is the thing that where we form our questions and we try to provide our answers. The same is true for user experience and customer experience. They are different. For me, user experience is digital, the sum of all those interactions. Customer experience is non-digital. And I think this understanding is pretty critical, because if you don't get that understanding, you go down the road of thinking that the hand, because it's connected to the body by 12 other systems, is like the foot. You don't realize its function, its purpose, what it's meant to do, what it's been adapted to do. You go, oh, it's all the same. We have this generalization. It's another problem within our field, generalizing, not being intellectual enough about this thing that we do and the importance of why we should do it. Because it's easy, yeah? It's user experience. It's not easy. I think it's really difficult. After 21 years, I sometimes wake up and I think, what do I actually know about the craft that I've been working in for so long? And then sometimes I think, not a lot. I need to know more. I need to understand it more deeply. I need to be broader. And I think what we're going to see, and why I say it's really important to sort of see these differences, is that I think you're going to see a massive shift towards user experience becoming the dominant factor, more than customer experience. I think user experience is likely to become as important as business strategy itself. And for any business that is operating in a pure play way, it is absolutely critical. It is the business strategy. How can it not be? Digital is the way by which they operate. People talk to me a lot about return on investment or KPIs. Simon, what are the key KPIs that we need to come up with? And they list 20. And I'm like, I've got a problem with that, 20. I'm like, why? And I say, because it's got the word key in front of it. Key should be only about 2 or 3, ever. And the one that I kind of am interested in understanding is customer lifetime value. Why am I interested in trying to understand customer lifetime value? Because it allows me to focus on these 3 critical aspects of experience that actually drive revenue and value for the business and deliver value to the consumer. How do we acquire customers? How do we onboard customers? And in understanding that relationship, we then understand how to keep them, how to retain them. This is fundamental. It's not about this transcends the idea of conversion rate. Conversion rate would sit within this. Once you understand the behaviors of how you acquire someone, you can then apply that understanding to actually supporting you serve them better for longer. I mean, how often does that happen that we think, right, we're going to do customer acquisition to understand how to onboard people. And we're going to use the insights and understanding from that acquisition research to apply it to onboarding, prototyping. Rarely. I mean, this is, right here, this is the experience. This is the thing that the business wants to do. This is the thing the customer wants to do. They're just opposites, they're just opposite sides of the same coin. how do you move from theory and models to design? Because it's still the question that I get asked. I say to my clients, it's all design, everything. I saw a fantastic presentation last year by Matthew Holloway at UX Strategy in Boulder, and he spoke about this eloquently in a very detailed way, the application of design to solve different sorts of business problems. And if you get a chance to go and look at that, have a look at it, because I find it quite inspiring because I think in the same way that he thinks. All of this stuff that we do is design. It's all design, every bit of it. This is what we have to make our clients understand. And the way that we kind of run programs, and this sort of program that I'm kind of outlining here is our typical methodology for doing stuff. It all starts with a period of quite deep contextual research, trying to understand the business and the consumer and the markets in which it operates, the potential disruptors and opportunities for disruption. That leads to a strategy stream. Strategy should be fundamentally different from any, what I would call, design execution, and kept separate from design execution. Often, when I walk into a project, what's happened is strategies become design execution. But it's not turned back to strategy. Strategy must always be present. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of people's opinions. And if you do it in this way, and you start to separate in this way, it also then allows you to do things like, how do you embed user experience? How do you make user experience part of culture, which is a fundamental requirement, say, for what Liberty Global wanted? How do we do that? Because they don't just want to deliver a better experience. They want to be able to deliver a better experience themselves. So that's not just helping them make assets better, help them design better journeys. That's helping them do it for themselves. That's helping them how they think. And if you do it in that way, it also then allows you to separate out innovation. And in doing it in this way, it means you don't get kind of confused. One thing doesn't lead to another. You don't get sidetracked. You don't go down dead ends. You can do everything together in a nice, choreographed way. And the way that we help organizations do that is by coming up with a framework. And the fact of the framework is the framework should allow you to do these things together. It should allow you to sort of do the strategy, do the execution, do the innovation, and also do the kind of embedding, the institutionalization. It should allow you to do it together. A good framework will allow you to do that together, because that's a function of a framework. And frameworks are really, really good, and especially for brands like Liberty Global, because we're talking about a multi-brand reality. It's not a single brand reality. It's not British Airways in different ways. This is very different brands with very different teams, with very different cultures, with very different processes, thinking in very different ways, which means that this idea of alignment through a framework doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in the center. You may get greater alignment by not being in the center, because that is more relevant for that company, for its culture, and its ambition. So the quality or state of being mature. Okay, this is the thing that we need to help organizations do to become more mature about UX. So we have a model, and it kind of starts like this. Oblivious, aware, synchronized, culture, brand. Along the top, and at the bottom, what you can see is kind of individual, project, program, system, ecosystem. Very few organizations exist at the level of culture, let alone exist at the level of brand. Really, it's super rare to get that level of cultural embedding. It's even rarer to be a brand from a UX perspective. Most organizations, in my opinion, operate here, especially the ones that I deal with. I'm trying to move the needle for them in different ways between aware and synchronized. Look at some of the characteristics of an aware team. They're kind of tactical. There's a problem, our conversion rate's gone down, we must do something about it. They don't typically have a UX team structure. Kind of tells for me, do you have an information architect? No, our information architecture is done by UXers. Okay, that tells me something about how they think about user experience and IA, because they're very different things. They outsource a lot of stuff. There's little knowledge sharing, and quite often they're demographically led. With a synchronized team, they will have a vision. They will be customer focused. But they don't get this overlap. they're still siloed. They're not heard. The way that they affect change and are affected by it is very slow. For me to consider them operating at the level of culture from a digital first perspective means it needs to be embedded across everything that they do. I gave the example of Amanda with Macmillan. Socially, I think that they have that. But they have a model that supports them being able to do that. It's not enough just to have a team and to have a strategy. To become mature enough that you have UX culture means that you need to think and act very differently. We measure these activities in terms of a bunch of continuums that we use. How well do people do things? And typically we're trying to do that because we're trying to help companies what we call bridge this strategic gap, make them reduce the coupling between customer and business. What Jim was talking about this morning, shared value. Shared value means business and customer, not one more than the other. They need to work together. That's what strategists will do. We will work out how to do that. And the way we kind of do this with organizations is that our kind of model, our model profiles, so which essentially is a bunch of questions. We then kind of score those questions. Those things get analyzed, and then we kind of turn it into a report to say, this is where you currently are. So for example, I've got there on the screen a question. Do you or your development teams understand what is meant by user experience design? You think when I ask this question, anyone says no? They all say yes, but I said, okay, great. How do you do it then? Explain it to me. And because I want to understand how they do it. Because if I understand how they do it, I can understand how to make them better at it. I just don't accept that they say, yeah, we do it. And I think once you understand this idea of, say, UX maturity, what it allows you to do is to target companies that are customer-focused. So we know that they're customer-focused when they have a customer experience strategy. And what's good about that is we can think about it in terms of alignment. So for me, I know that an organization or a corporation is serious because they have a customer experience strategy, and typically a customer experience team. And that's interesting because what we could start to get is alignment between methods that are shared, both in terms of UX and CX. Personas, journeys, customer experience people have been doing this for a long time, longer than we have. Like service design is a lot older than we think it is. It was based on a book that was written, the best part of 32 years ago, Service Dominant Logic. These things have existed for a long time. So essentially, UX represents the kind of UX behind, UX strategy represents the UX behind the UX and all of its design. And you could do that through workshopping. So we do a lot of workshopping. And workshopping is great because you get people to problem solve, but you also get them, you're getting them to embed. You get to see how they design together, how they collaborate, how they team, how they think. So you can start to give them extra bits of information to get better and better at stuff. Here I have a journey. And at the top of the journey, it's pretty basic. We did that in one workshop with a whole bunch of people. Then you go through the journey again. You can see it becomes a little bit more detailed. And then again, it becomes even more detailed. And if we focus on, say, one aspect of the journey, an onboarding aspect, then you think, okay, how do you represent this stuff? You need to, when you want to embed this within an organization, you need to be able to find ways of embedding this stuff, yeah? It's got a little video. This is one of the things that we kind of do. Like, can we embed this stuff? See how it communicates so much of the journey to everybody in a way that people will get. You know, when you want to talk to the C-suite, we can't necessarily talk to them in the language of design, even though we want to. We have to find the right level at which to operate. But you show them a video like this, they go, I've got it. It makes sense. I mean, you can see it's responsive because there it is in the image. But you know, still the question will be asked, but where's the design? This is great, all this kind of research, prototyping, testing, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay. It's all design, yeah? In fact, that was the most important design done there. This bit, what we call the skin, the actual manifestation of the design itself, is, I would argue, the easier bit. But it's the bit that people want. Show us the bit that looks beautiful, the visual aesthetic bit. If you don't do the bit underneath it, it doesn't make any difference because there's going to be loads of problems that are fundamentally wrong with the design. So it's all design. You know, really good visual designers can make something look however they want it to look. So recapping. To create a really good user experience strategy, we need to develop a digital-first philosophy, a way of thinking that is philosophical. That underpins how we develop a strategy. That strategy has to be able to accommodate both micro and macro aspects of the design. We do that because it allows us to think about journeys and how to perfect them. And in thinking about journeys, we then can take the broader step into thinking about ecosystems, systems thinking. And all of that has to be framed within the idea that we are talking about a designerly activity. This is how I think of UX strategy. I love the red arrows. And I think that a great team, you know, this work that we do, this design work that we do is not done by one person. It's done as a team. It's a team effort. It's a choreography. And that's why we need to think about it as a choreography, as a whole, rather than just the parts. We have to see it together and actually act and work together. Thank you. Okay, we've got 17 minutes to do everything. I'll happily take a question, though. I have a question.
Package. Oh, thank you. But I was wondering if you could give maybe another example of a particular UX strategy that's been successful, because as a designer, I think I'm a lot of the time bogged down in those details that you were talking about, and it's difficult to get that bigger picture. And I was wondering if you could give an example of a UX strategy, how it's been done, and how it's been done well, and what return it's given.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good question, and to answer that, I'm going to say that we need to look at the brands that are the most visual. So I made the point of Uber, for example, and a great UX strategy is understanding that there is a business model that is underneath how the business is going to serve its customers, the kind of value chain that it needs to choreograph, and the way that it delivers value to the customer as well as value back to the business, and its kind of raison d'etre, its why of making money. So these sorts of organizations are the ones that kind of demonstrate to us how it's done. I mean, Instagram's a great example, yeah? I often say, you know, what's the thing about Instagram that makes it so awesome? People go, oh, it's sharing its content. Well, that's given. It's a given you can do that. What makes it so awesome is it allows people to take photographs that are not very visually photographically gifted like myself and make them quite cool and quite stylish. That's what makes them shareable. And we know that this is its UX main feature because all of its apps allow you to change the filter, it's designed to allow you to do more filters, to actually create these sorts of photos. And the point that I'm making is the companies that are the best at doing this have the best business models. They are the ones that are ultimately disrupting the market right now. You're not going to kind of get this perspective by looking at clients. There are many clients that I'm working with that are asking me right now, how do we defend against disruption? How do we do that? How do we know what to do in 3 years' time? So it's, the thing about UX strategy is much more focused on trying to understand business models and how business models deliver customer value and how that value is kind of manifest in terms of business value rather than, say, personas or wireframes or design. So all that stuff that I showed you, the design stuff, that is the output of a strategy. The strategy must always start by understanding what is the business, who are its customers, how does it operate across the value chain, how does it deliver value to both business and to the consumer, and how does it make money? That is the strategic aspect that we need to do as UX practitioners. That is what a McKinsey would come in and do. That's what they would work out. The reason why I think that we are better equipped as an industry to do it is because we have the designerly skills they do not have. You can't just embed this stuff and go, hey, we've got 20 new designers. We've got it now. I mean, that would be the equivalent of me reading a book on brain surgery and then going, hey, I'm ready. It pays 5 times better than my current job. Let's do that. It doesn't work like that. These things require a lot of practice. And, it could turn out that I don't have the aptitude or skill or mental dexterity to do that. Strategy is about models and UX design is about execution. But they need to work together. I think Jim's point about translation, it's not just strategy and execution, they have to work together. So one needs to understand enough about strategy to be able to execute it well. And the problem with UX is that UX is a synthetic practice that kind of choreographs many disciplines. So it is strategic in its nature, but that doesn't make you a strategist. Strategists ask very different sorts of questions. They're interested in different sorts of things. You may become a strategist, but you may not. That's just the way it is. And some people are going to be better strategists than others, as some people are going to be better designers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.